Io vi devo presentare un ospite d'eccezione che si chiama ATLE SKIEKKELAND, giusto? Ok. ATLE SKIEKKELAND è il vicepresidente di AIM, che è un'associazione per la gestione delle informazioni e delle immagini, e ci parlerà fondamentalmente dell'impatto dei social, del mobile e del cloud computing. So, Atli, you have about 30 minutes, and after your speech, I'd love to ask to the public, to the people in the room, to make you some questions. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So, please go ahead with your talk. You have 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm sorry I can't do this in Italian. You have choices either English or Norwegian, and I understand Norwegian is not the best language here. My name is ATLE SKIEKKELAND, as I said. I'm share some ideas and some of the research we've done for managing information in the future. What's the impact of cloud? What's the impact of social? What's the impact of mobile? I'll try to fit with the schedule. But I also provide you with copies of the presentation. I'll publish that on SlideShare later today, or you can send me an email and get a PowerPoint copy if you want copies of all this research. My title also just changed last week from Vice President Chief Operating Officer and responsible for all things within AIM. And just to give a quick overview, AIM is a non-profit industry association. We go back to 1943. We do research, education, training program. We do standards like PDF, and PDF-A is something that come via us. And we also just launched an information management certification based on the demand from our 65,000 member community. So the website is aim.org for additional information. And my role, I've been working for this association since 2004, before that management consulting in this industry. As you see on my name, my background, perhaps I shouldn't explain it this way, I'm 75% Norwegian, 25% Swedish. To make world a little bit more complex, my wife is from Indonesia with Portuguese blood in her, and our daughter was born in the UK with a Dutch nationality. And we, since 2005, have lived in Washington, D.C. So it's a little bit complex. There's two things I want to explain before going into the trends. One is that statistics, because you know when you look at statistics, it's difficult sometimes to draw conclusions, and it's dangerous sometimes to draw conclusions. So this is my disclaimer about statistics, how to avoid heart attack. Because when we looked at it, we found that the Japanese eat very little fat and suffer few heart attacks than the British Americans. We found the French eat a lot of fat and also suffer few heart attacks than the British Americans. We found the Japanese drink very little red wine and suffer few heart attacks, while the Italians, like the Norwegians, drink excessive amounts of red wine and suffer few heart attacks. So based on this research, we found that you can eat and drink whatever you like, it's speaking English that kills you. So keep this in mind when I go through some of these numbers, because it gives an indication of things, but what does it really mean? The other thing I want to give before we start is a little bit definition, because information management is extremely versatile. It can means many different things. People do have different objectives. And it's almost like this German animal here, eierlegende Vollmilchsau, that you can use it for all these different things. And when we looked at our research, saying what are the main projects that people are currently tasked with, what they're working on with managing or sharing information, we found it to be basically these 7, which is the priority within our community. One is information is published and made available. Better collaboration. 3 is access to information, self-service and search. Then you have this big data, which IBM and EMC is pushing now with intelligence and analytics, but also privacy, governance, security, and streamlining process. So what I'll cover now is 8 things that actually influence how that the cloud, social, and mobile influences how we approach this project moving forward. So let's start therefore on the easiest one of them all that you all know of. But there's a couple of points I want to make about this. One is that the information, of course, as you all know, is growing exponentially. And that means for every year we go, it's more and more. And the curve is going like this. But at the same time, as Clay Shirky, an author, said it, it's not an information overload problem, it's filter failure. Because nobody's complaining they don't have enough knowledge, or nobody's complaining they have too much knowledge. It's really about not having the right information. So how can we use then social, or how can we use algorithms to help us become aware of information and use those as filters? And we're starting to see this also in SharePoint environments and others, that you try to use your relationships, your networks, as a filter to learn things. The same way I use Twitter myself. But how to manage this information when it's being created so much, that's also a little bit up for debate. In knowledge management environments, the discussion is, should you filter on the way in or should you filter on the way out? What I mean by that, if you filter on the way out, that means you store almost everything you can, and then you put in algorithms or social technologies to make information available to staff when they need it. Or you filter on the way in, saying, this doesn't have any value, get rid of it, only store things that you need to have. And we have to say that records management or archiving, there's a question that some people, what's the value? We think there's big value. If there's regulations, there's big value. But the cost, of course, now in many organizations is that it's more expensive to get rid of information than to keep it. And therefore, that creates some challenges within how we then manage and share information. So, number 2 about social. In 1999, this book came out called The Crew Train Manifesto. Anybody read it? It's a book that was very early. The authors were very early of saying the web changes quite a lot. And what I meant by it is that it changes from being a monologue to a dialogue. The web allows you to engage with people, they can respond and get back to you. And what we see is that it's not only markets that are conversations, it's also inside an organization. It's organizations themselves are conversations. And one way of summarize this is basically to look at the research, like in the US now, actually overall, people are now spending more time on Facebook than they are on Google. And 96% of people between 18 and 35, 96% of those are now on social network, one or more. And the more we start using that as consumers out there in the world, the more it starts influencing what we do in the enterprise. Not only about marketing, how to promote our product, but inside an organization. Or as Single put it, why is it know more about what my high school girlfriend had for dinner than what's going on in my organization? Can I use the same inside? And when we ask our members, you see there is a generation differences here, but more and more people saying, I would like to use the same inside. That these conversations are building blocks of a community within my organization. And you could argue that you don't really have a choice. This is a chart that I got from John Newton from Alfresco. This is in the US. On the y-axis is number of births in the US over years on the x-axis. So you see there's a generation change happening in corporate America, and I expect it to be similar here. When you have what we call the email generations are currently the one making decisions, but they will be retiring, and you have a new, what we joke about as the Facebook generation coming in. And they have different expectations for mobile, social, and how to work with technologies. What to share, how to collaborate. Not only what to do, but how to do it. A website actually asked earlier this year 1,500 teenagers how they prefer to communicate. 68% that said that their top communication, their preferred communication tool was text messages. Only 10% said phone calls. And you see that the way we communicate is even being influenced by this. Number 3, and number 3 for me is a fun one. Because since 2000, the research we did with Jeffrey Moore last year. Since 2000, we see an awful lot of organizations have been asking themselves, does IT matter? What's their ROI? What's the return of investment? What's the business case for investing? While at the same time asking tough questions in enterprise IT, consumer IT has taken completely off. And the result of that is that, according to Forrester, another analyst, that more than 50% of employees now think they have better technology at home than they have in the office. And 35% of employees think that the technology they now have in the office, they already know how to use as consumers. So the center of innovation have changed from being 20 years ago the big corporate IT department. Now innovation is happening in consumer technologies and is impacting us. And give you two quick examples. One is deployment cycle, the time it takes to implement things. If I'm used to, as a business executive or as a user, 15 or 10 seconds to install a new application here, why would I then accept a 2-year implementation for the enterprise software? It's not fair to compare directly, but it's starting to influence how we procure and how we want to roll out technology. The other challenge is user interface. And just give you a bad example here. This is not fair to Microsoft, but this is Word 2003, I've been told, with all functionality shown. And you could argue that the more you add additional functionality, the more you can actually move away from what people are using the most. And that's been a typical evolution in software development. So the point is, perhaps I use iPhone here as an example. iPhone took market share from BlackBerry, not by having more functionality, but less. The smarter, simpler, easier user interface. And that matters more than a rich application. So let's jump to number 4 here of the 8. And that is that computers are everywhere. And we're expecting a second, third, and fourth mobile revolutions. Actually, we're running out of technology to compare mobiles with because of the adoption. It was stated at a conference in Asia earlier this year that is estimated that 4.2 billion people have a toothbrush, while 5.1 billion people have a cell phone. And you're starting to see that how people are spending a cell phone, and I have a wallet in one pocket, I have my cell phone in the others, but now Google even launched Google Wallet in some markets, and you start to see things changing. And that's always connected to the net and always, how to say, then able to process. And within an enterprise, I was actually sitting at the National Airport last week in Washington, looking around at the airport on a Thursday morning, and just that moment in time, I didn't see a single laptop around me. It was all smartphones and tablets. And I'm thinking, our website, our own systems, they don't support that well yet. And therefore, how do we prepare? Because the future is going mobile. Anybody from IBM here? IBM, the letters IBM used to stand for I'm being moved based on the org chart. It was difficult to understand where people were working. Now the joke is that IBM stands for I'm by myself, because more than 40% of the workforce in IBM don't really belong to one office. They're either virtual, working from coffee shops, from the car, hotels, or home offices. And therefore, the tools that people use have to change to support that. Number 5, and this becomes more and more relevant for some of the consumer technologies. And that's that manual processes are the enemy. This is a screenshot from my iPhone and my MacBook. MacBook comes now with face recognition software included. I tag a person, it looks through the library of pictures, and try to identify, is this person? And iPhones and like other devices like that comes with geotagging. It tags automatically based on where you took the picture, if you have that enabled. All automatic, because me as a consumer, I'm not willing to sit there and add metadata about everything. So if we look at our industry, this is one screenshot from a solution that I've hidden the name of. It was typical that you have some file plan here, and you could drag and drop the important emails or documents down to that area to be managed within an enterprise content management solution, for example. But in web content management, we've been teaching people when designing website, don't make the customer think and don't make them read. It should be very intuitive, fast, figuring out finding what you need to find. While in records management, we've been telling our users, please read everything and please think every single time you do something. And then we start wondering, why are they not doing as I told? So we need them to see, can we build algorithms, analytics there to support this in a better way. Number 6 of the 8 is accountability. Because as an organization, you're accountable to shareholders, to the government, and therefore employees need to be accountable to the organization for what they do. Social media is then creating a problem. This is a lady that basically had an update on Facebook that she didn't really like her job or her boss, but had forgotten that she just had befriended her boss, so he got the update also. And got fired actually in the US via Facebook. But if you look at corporate information, we see that organizations are struggling with all the new type of information. What they have better control of is paper correspondence, paper forms, computer reports, and all these type of things. But we have to therefore rethink a little bit how we think about governance, how we think about compliance. Instead of thinking on each device, what's the policy for Twitter, what's the policy for Facebook, do we instead need to think about what's the policy for that person or that person? How do we ensure that they do as they're told? How do we detect that it's not happening? And how do we then respond to non-compliance? So, one of my favorites also, number 7 of the 8. Anybody remember this application? WordPerfect. WordPerfect was brilliant. As long as you remember this F bar, whatever it was, this paper bar that you have to run F buttons, Control Shift F7 to print, store, whatever it was. What happened to them? What happened? Because within a few years, their market dominance was just gone. And what happened was that the platform changed. And the platform changed, as Seth Godin said, when the platform changes, the leader change. Because you as users preferred Windows versus DOS. And WordPerfect was not fast enough to take that transition because they felt they had good market dominance on the DOS platform. And you're seeing the same in the US across the world now. In other markets, like in the US, one of the biggest bookstores has been Borders. They're now bankrupt. They're gone because people are buying their books via Amazon. One of the biggest video retailers, rental companies, Blockbuster. Blockbuster is also bankrupt now. Why? Because people get their videos online, either Netflix, iTunes, or other places. And we're starting to see the same thing here, and some authors have been calling this the big switch, even though many vendors see this more as many small switches, where there's a cloud competition going on. And Google, even though how Google make their money is on advertisement, ads, is that Google, as Information Week said, Google Apps Refresh sets up DevPath with Microsoft and really trying to be the platform there in the same way they have with Droid and on other platforms. While Microsoft, you might have seen the advertisement this year, to the cloud, with Microsoft saying, no, that we plan to beat Google in the cloud. And then you have other players like Salesforce and others that also have a platform play here in the cloud. And just as a reference, when you look at it, this is extremely appealing to business people. Why? Because finally we can get quick deployment of technology, and we can even bypass our IT departments that are too slow. And I was told by HP, actually, that they see business people adopting cloud services 2.5 times faster than IT people. But even within corporate IT, this is benefits. But Microsoft, this is just the revenue in Microsoft from 2006 to 2009. Office, server tools, Windows, online services, red. So Microsoft is still spending an awful lot of money to be relevant, and one way of looking at it is they don't want to become WordPerfect that they competed out almost 20 years ago. Sorry, 20 years, less than that. And therefore, this about cloud services, we're already starting to see many switches happening, but people are still nervous, especially about security, but also accessibility and integration. So to summarize some of these trends, especially focus on the social side, the cloud and mobile, what we started seeing and tried to put words on was last year what we call system of engagement. And I don't use this term that much publicly, but it's a way of trying to summarize some of these trends. And a way to show this also is that Time magazine in 1983, then the computer was the device of the year. While in 2007, a couple of years ago, you were the person of the year. So there's a change here in the office of what matters and what's important. And when we're going to try to summarize all this stuff in one slide, like the history of enterprise IT in one slide, this might be some way of doing it. That you have the mainframe era, the mini computers era, the PC era, the internet era, and what's the era we're now moving into? The most famous companies, perhaps IBM in mainframes, digital equipment, Microsoft in the PC era, Google in the internet era. And us in this industry, we were mostly focused on managing document in the PC era, web content in the internet era. What's now we need to look at in the next 10 years? We're going to move from document management to content management to what? And a way to summarize this is to look at the focus until the last 20, 30 years has been a building system of record. System of record basically meaning what information, system of record is something you build of two reasons. One, to be able to automate business transactions, ERP systems, typical example, and the other is to provide better overview to management, information going up to management. Well, if you look into the future, IBM did some excellent research last year asking 1,500 business executives what's important for you, and you saw a reinvent customer relationship, two-way communication to sync with customers, from a monologue to a dialogue, profit from information explosion. That's a big data theme that they're running with, but also connecting staff to be able to respond quicker, faster, and be simpler and smarter. While Forrester talk about this as the empowered era, because going from that monologue to the dialogue opens up opportunity for sales support, for knowledge exchange, knowledge management, and better communication transparency, and lots of other examples that they've been actually publishing several books about. So to summarize this back in a slide, what I mentioned as system of engagement is basically then that you have now a social and cloud era we see in the middle. And it means that for you that are responsible for managing things, many of you, that could actually be a conversation. It could be a Skype message, it could be a phone call, it could be a wiki. And if Facebook perhaps is the most known company these days, but system of record is still relevant, because when you make that decision, when you make that advice in a social media or in whatever technology you're using, you still need a record of that because of accountability, because of being responsible, your company being accountable to the government, to your shareholders. And therefore, what we published last year, and we have new reports coming out actually this month with a guy called Andrew McAfee from MIT, is reports covering then what's the business benefits here, and what's the documented ROI, and how do we link this back to the system of record? Because that's also a difficult area, especially standard area. If your content out there is stored on commercial websites in the cloud, like Facebook, and what's the way you can control and manage that? There's limitations, and it changes a little bit of your requirements moving forward. That's the stuff I want to summarize. If you shoot me an email, I'll give you the email address in a few seconds. I'll send you a copy of all this research, so you have the full report instead of not just a snapshot we gave you here now. Couple of things just to mention. AIM.org/training, if you want to check out some of the training program, especially one on enterprise content management or process improvement and records management. And the last is this new information certification, and there's two things I want to mention about that. There's no training requirements, so if you have the skill set, you can go directly to a Prometric test center and take the exam and be a certified in information management. Or you wait a couple of weeks and we will launch around 120 videos on our website for free that you can go through this and prepare for taking the exam. So that's a small pitch at the end here. Here's my email address and Twitter handle. At Skiekkеland, it might be worthwhile. This is one of my favorite pictures as an ad for picture. Thank you for that. Questions?
Thank you so much, ATLE. That was a very nice and useful presentation. So now it's time for questions. I want just to remember you that we are going to visit the demo point in the room, in the other rooms, and we'll start again around 11:30, right? And so we have at least 10 minutes for a brief question and answer session. Insomma, abbiamo 10 minuti di domande, se qualcuno vuole farne può avvicinarsi o prego il personale di sala di fornire un microfono.
Any question? Are you waiting for translation services to start? Yes.
Okay. Simple question, yeah.
Si presenti per favore.
Yes, my name is Leo Sorgi. I'm a journalist in ICT since 35 years. And my question is, you put together video as important and social media. Don't you think that video is overrated because of the history of television and we should make less videos and use more social media?
If I understand the question is correctly, if you see the traffic of the internet now, Wired magazine published a report, an article about this around a year ago, where you see a significant amount of now the web traffic is actually video. It's either peer-to-peer communication, but video is like the big monster of web traffic currently out there on the internet overall. And I have to say, both as a consumer and the executive within IT, that yes, please, because videos makes it easier for me to process information than I do in a big Word document. But that's just my preference. And therefore, short, simple video are, and Gartner also published a report about this, for peer-to-peer education and stuff like that, is something we're starting to see more and more of. And it puts bandwidth issues on our servers, it puts storage problems and all those things, but there's huge benefit of it. And we're starting to see some early adopters also leveraging that. For example, CNN. CNN has a system for reporters. They use Twitter to give tasks, using social media to give tasks. Have then any volunteers that want to say, I have a story here, you can submit that videos either via social media or via cell phones directly upload to CNN. So leveraging consumer technologies and social media for video, and I think we're going to see more of it. But did I understand your question then correctly, or did I answer my own question?
You probably did. It wasn't the answer I expected.
Okay. Other questions?
Domande? Nessuna? Sono sicuro che avete delle curiosità, magari esatto, se avete una qualche timidezza a fare quelle domande in inglese le possiamo rivolgere in italiano e magari aiutare altri nella loro comprensione. So, ATLE, you have talked about very many topics, and so what could you tell to a people like me who does not use Facebook, who has just cancelled his LinkedIn profile, who deserted Quora, who didn't want to enter into Google+, and who use Linux, GNU Linux, and the latest Ubuntu version, and is a fan of free and open source software and of free hardware, and makes his own devices inside at home?
That's a tough question. There's many ways of, I can approach it many ways. One is that social media Sorry, I should do this one. Social media. It took me a while to get it, because it felt like social media was information overload, and therefore I didn't have time for it. Instead, I realized that actually that social media is actually a good filter, information filter. So via social media, either inside my organization, or on Facebook, or on Twitter, first of all Twitter, I learn about things I wouldn't necessarily learn about if I were not there. But I can't drink it all because there's too much happening. I just look at it now and then, because if it's important, especially on Twitter, it will go around and round and round and round. So if I look at it that day, I still will pick it up, even though I might have not been there last 2 days. The problem with some of those social media platforms is that they are in some way almost dictatorships. And we're missing some of the standards, we're missing some of the governance, we're missing the privacy, the security, the trust in it. Because it feels like these people that owns these platforms are either selling our information or doing things with it that we don't even know, and therefore it's a changing game.
You perfectly got the point.
Yeah. But the solution to it, I think you could argue that if you go through the evolution, the adoption of any technologies, in the beginning here, there's often this is what usually happens. Same with mainframes, same with computers, same with a lot of other technologies. And then we get into early majority and adoption, you're starting to see more standardization, more formalized standards, more open initiatives, and then change the game for what moves. And that feels like that's what we need on some of those areas. For example, even within cloud, we need some sort of internet operating system in some way exchanging. And we just now in the content management industry at least got the content standard for interoperability, which has also been missing, which many consultants have been making good money on.
Thank you so much. New questions? Altre domande? Flavia, hai qualcosa da chiedere? Allora, a questo punto io intanto voglio ringraziare tantissimo... Ah, eccoli. Ancora domande.
Just a question. You were talking about the information certification. Could you please let me know how we can get into this certification? You just show us to get as a multiple choice exam, something like this, but where we can take it, how we have to follow the courses, and what the skill needed to get into the courses. Thank you.
Excellent question, at least for me. The information certification is something we started 1.5 years ago because we ask our members all the time, like, what's important for you, what are you missing? And suddenly when asking about certification beginning of last year, we had around 70% of our members saying, yes, we need an information certification. So what we developed was we hired a company called Prometric to run through the process and see if I can... to develop a 2-hour certification, multiple choice, that's computer-based. That means that you can go to prometric.com/aim, find any local test center. I'm sure there's at least a couple of hundreds just here in Italy, and then schedule a time with them and go and take it. But of course, it might be good to go to the AIM website first to see what are the domains that's covered on the certification, because it basically covers those 7 areas we just had earlier on that's important for information management, which means is everything from cloud computing to mobile support to social media, but focusing on the traditional information management where we have defined best practices. We are actually looking for... AIM are not providing training for this. We're relying on training partners. But to speed up that process, we developed these 120 videos that's live in 2 or 3 weeks. And any members of AIM or training companies can get free copies of all those PowerPoints that was used to create the videos. So which means that if any of you want to start, offering training courses or know somebody to do it, we have around 1,000 slides that you can start to kick off the development for free without license fees. So just shoot an email to me, and I'll forward that to the right person for doing so. Okay?